The metallic clink of a coin landing on age would slice through the drunken murmurs of McCain's saloon. Yet it wasn't the coin's echo that sent a chill through Thaddeus Royce's spine. It was a sharp voice that followed, slicing to the haze of tobacco smoke like a rusted knife. Lot 17. Young, healthy, literate, starting at $50. Thaddeus had only come in for a drink, hoping to wash away 3 brutal days spent mending fences under the harsh Arizona sun. The last thing he anticipated was stumbling into a scene pulled straight from the nightmares of a war he had desperately tried to leave behind. His calloused hands tightened around the edge of the bar as his eyes locked on the small makeshift stage near the poker tables. Standing under the dim glow of oil lamps was a woman, no older than 28, her chin defiantly raised, her dark skin glowing against the worn blue dress that draped her form. It wasn't her appearance that struck him, it was her eyes. They burned, not with fear, but with a silent fury, daring any man to strip her the little dignity she still clung to. 60, came a voice from the back, followed by the oily grin of Vernon McCain himself, the saloon's owner, revealing a row of gold teeth as he surveyed the room. 70, called another bidder, she can educate my boys. Thaddeus clenched his jaw. This was why he had abandoned civilization 15 years ago, choosing instead the company of cattle and endless desert winds. His ranch, isolated 40 miles from town, allowed him to pretend that perhaps humanity had learned something from all that blood spilled during the war. But as he watched the woman's hands tremble, her only betrayal of fear, the past came crashing back like cannon fire. 80. The fat man in the bowler hat was nearly breathless, sweat trickling down his reddened face. McCain's eyes gleamed with greed. Going once. McCain's voice rang out, savoring the moment. Gentlemen, you're bidding on a rare find, educated, strong, and in her prime. Thaddeus's hand drifted to the leather pouch at his belt. The silver dollars inside were meant for breeding stock, hard-earned money representing endless days under the brutal sun. But then her eyes met his, just for a fleeting heartbeat, and he saw it. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom. She was fighting for her soul. Going twice. McCain's voice hovered in the smoky air. That's when Thaddeus stood, his chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor, cutting through the noise like a gunshot. Every head turned toward him. The reclusive rancher who rarely set foot in town suddenly bidding on a woman. 100, he said, his voice cool and sharp as a blade. A thick silence swallowed the saloon. Even the piano player froze, fingers hovering above the keys. McCain's golden grin faltered for the briefest second before widening once again, his snake-like eyes narrowing in amusement. Well now, McCain drawled, it ain't Thaddeus Royce himself. Didn't expect to see you back among a civilized folk. The room held its breath as Thaddeus stepped forward, boots clicking against the worn floorboards. But his eyes never wavered from the woman on the platform, Celeste Washington, who now studied him with a complicated mix of caution and fragile hope. Trust was dangerous currency for someone in her position. 100, Thaddeus repeated, drawing out 5 $20 gold coins and placing them on the nearest table. They gleamed under the lamplight. The fat man sputtered, "Now hold on, McCain. I was bidding fair." McCain silenced him with a raised hand, his smile turning calculating. Business is business. Though, I must admit, Royce, I'm curious. What use could you possibly have for educated help on that godforsaken stretch of land you call home? The words dripped with venomous suggestion, but Thaddeus stayed composed. That's my business. Celeste gave the slightest shake of her head, a warning. She was trying to protect him, even from the platform. 110, barked the bowler-hatted man, still unwilling to yield. But before McCain could call for higher bids, he lifted his hand again, signaling a halt. A strange coldness crawled up Thaddeus's spine. "Gentlemen," McCain announced, voice thick with false regret, "I'm pulling lot 17 from tonight's auction." The room erupted in frustrated protests, but McCain overpowered them with his oily charm. "It seems Miss Washington has unresolved legal matters that must be addressed before any transactions occur." Thaddeus's fingers instinctively hovered near his Colt .45. He knew this game. Changing the rules mid-play was how men like McCain clung to power. Celeste's eyes briefly flashed with panic, before she massed it once more. Whatever was happening now was far worse than the auction. "What debts?" Thaddeus asked, his voice deadly calm. McCain's grin stretched wide. "The kind that require private resolution. I suggest you take your money elsewhere, Royce." Two of McCain's hired men began inching closer, hands resting near their holstered pistols. Professionals. Thaddeus recognized the type, men who handle problems quickly and bury them quietly. McCain lowered his voice, though it still carried across the saloon. "Miss Washington killed a white man. Self-defense, she claims. But the sheriff out in Tombstone's been looking for her for 2 weeks." The words dropped like dynamite. Thaddeus's pulse hammered in his ears. Celeste, unwavering, spoke up. "That man cornered me in a hotel room. He tried to force himself on me. I defended myself with a letter opener. Any court with a shred of decency would call it justified." McCain chuckled darkly. "Decent courts don't exist for women like you, Miss Washington. And the man you killed? He was a mayor's son." A bitter cold spread through Thaddeus's chest. In 1885 Arizona, no jury would ever entertain self-defense when a black woman stood accused of killing a prominent white man. McCain's men closed in careful but ready. "Here's how this will go," McCain announced, addressing the room like a ringmaster. "Miss Washington will accompany me to discuss her situation privately. Any interference will be treated as obstruction of the law." Thaddeus saw it then, in Celeste's eyes, not just fear but resignation. She was readying herself to die. The woman who had stood tall on the auction block was surrendering to fate. "What's your true game, McCain?" Thaddeus asked coldly. "No game," McCain replied with mock innocence. "Just helping uphold the law. Unless—" He paused, his voice thick with greed. "Someone were to compensate me for my troubles." Thaddeus understood fully now. This was never about the auction. It was extortion, carefully staged from the moment Celeste stepped into the saloon. "How much?" Thaddeus asked. 500, McCain answered without hesitation. "In cash." The number struck like a hammer blow. $500. A fortune that most men wouldn't see in years. Enough to buy a patch of land, build a herd, and start anew somewhere far away from Arizona's merciless brand of justice. But as Thaddeus Royce looked at the woman on the platform, truly looked, he saw something that left him no choice. Behind the fear clouding her gaze, beneath the resignation settling into her posture, a tiny flicker of hope still burned. Delicate, fragile, like a flame that could die if even breathed too hard. And in that moment, Thaddeus Royce knew this was the very thing he'd spent 15 long years trying to avoid. Moments where decency cost more than survival. $500, he echoed softly, his weathered fingers drumming lightly on the handle of his gun belt. That's quite a steep price for someone so dedicated to community. McCain's sharp gaze narrowed, clearly not expecting calm reflection. He was anticipating outrage, or perhaps a bullet. But Thaddeus's cold, measured response unsettled him. And in a place like this, where every man was armed, that kind of imbalance was dangerous. The bigger of McCain's hired men, a thick-set enforcer with lifeless eyes known as Knuckles, shifted forward, sensing tension. "Boss, maybe we ought to—" "Quiet," McCain snapped, never breaking eye contact with Thaddeus. "Mr. Royce is still thinking. Isn't that right?" Thaddeus was thinking. He thought of the years spent telling himself that other people's troubles weren't his to carry, of the ranch he had poured his sweat, blood, and youth into, a ranch that stood as the only thing untouched by the war that had shattered him. But most of all, his mind kept returning to her. Celeste Washington's trembling hands, steady voice, and now, those perfectly still fingers, betraying neither panic nor defeat. She was prepared to die. "I don't have $500, Thaddeus finally said. McCain's grin widened into a gleam of triumph. "Then it looks like Miss Washington, and I will be having that little conversation after all." But Thaddeus's voice cut through like ice. "I have something else that might interest you." Reaching into his vest, he produced a folded sheet of paper, creased and worn at the edges. McCain's eyes fixed on it instantly, like a vulture circling over a fresh kill. And what might that be? The deed to the Circle Ranch. 4,700 acres of prime grazing land, water rights, a cabin that's been built up over 15 years, worth at least 2,000, if not more. His voice was solid as bedrock. A hush fell over the entire saloon. Even McCain's enforcers blinked in astonishment. Everyone knew that Thaddeus Royce would sooner die than part with his ranch. It was the one thing that had kept him alive when everything else fell apart. You'd give up your land for her? McCain's voice was now cautious, suspicious. Thaddeus glanced at Celeste. She, too, stared at him, stunned, trying to understand why a stranger would offer everything for a woman he'd never met. I would, he said simply. Why? The question came softly from Celeste, her voice breaking the thick silence. Thaddeus paused, memories flooding back. Of fields soaked with blood, of dying boys calling for mothers who would never come, of promises made when he laid down his rifle for the last time. Because some things matter more than land. McCain's greedy eyes lit up, but there was something else behind his expression now. He was calculating, dangerous, interesting offer, Royce. But I don't believe you're in a position to bargain. That was when Knuckles and his partner both drew their pistols, the smooth scrape of steel filling the heavy air. Thaddeus immediately realized what McCain had intended all along. None of them were meant to leave alive. But McCain had miscalculated one thing. Thaddeus Royce hadn't survived Gettysburg and 15 years of Apache raids by being slow. In a flash, Thaddeus's Colt .45 cleared leather and pointed directly at Knuckles, faster than a rattlesnake strike. But he didn't fire. His finger hovered on the trigger, frozen, because Celeste had moved. She had stepped into his line of fire, her voice calm, steady. Don't. Her eyes locked with his. The moment you pull that trigger, every lawman in Arizona will be hunting you. You'll be branded the man who killed for a fugitive. Knuckles laughed, a harsh, broken sound. Smart woman. Drop the gun. Cowboy, before this gets ugly. Thaddeus's mind spun through impossible calculations. 3 armed men here, who knew how many others were stationed around. Even if he dropped Knuckles and his partner, McCain would vanish into the chaos, and Celeste would be dead before morning. But as he stared into her eyes, he saw what truly stopped him. She wasn't only trying to spare his life, she was trying to save his soul. She was saving him from becoming again the kind of man who let violence carve his path. Put it down, Thaddeus, she whispered. Hearing his name from her lips felt like grace. Slowly, his arm lowered. 30 men exhaled all at once, filling the room like a prairie wind sweeping through open fields. McCain smiled, poisonous and pleased. Wise choice. He motioned toward the back staircase leading to his office, where darker business was always conducted. Miss Washington, shall we? But Celeste didn't move. Instead, she smiled, small at first, then growing, an unexpected expression that caught everyone off guard. You know what's funny, Mr. McCain? She said, her voice clear and sharp. You've spent so much time talking about debts and legal matters, but you never once asked why I came here. McCain's smug confidence wavered. Why did you? With steady hands, she reached into a hidden pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. She opened it, revealing pages upon pages filled with careful handwriting. I wasn't running from Tombstone's law, she continued. I was collecting evidence. Even from across the room, Thaddeus could make out the neat columns of names, dates, numbers. 3 years of your operations. Every stolen horse. Every cricket game. Every missing girl who disappeared upstairs and never came back. All recorded. All backed by witnesses. The hired guns exchanged confused glances, but McCain understood instantly. His face drained of color as the weight of her words settled. The real question, Mr. McCain, Celeste said, closing the journal, is, what's this worth to you? McCain's expression morphed rapidly. Shock, rage, fear, and calculation battling for dominance. But it was Knuckles who finally spoke, his voice low and uncertain. Boss, what you talking about? Shut up. McCain snapped, but it was too late. The saloon was shifting. Eyes filled with suspicion now turned toward him. Men who had once laughed and drank under his roof were rethinking every whispered rumor they'd ever heard. Celeste held the journal to her chest like a shield. Copies are already in the hands of trusted people in 3 different towns. If I don't check in regularly, they'll go straight to the territorial marshal. It was a magnificent bluff, and Thaddeus marveled at the steel it took to deliver it while standing barefoot on an auction stage. "You're lying," McCain hissed, but his voice trembled. "Am I?" she countered, unwavering. Celeste reopened the journal, her voice calm but piercing as she read aloud. March 15th, 1885. Horse theft. You and Knuckles stole 6 horses from Morrison Ranch, altered their brands, and sold them in Tucson for $200. The branding iron used is hidden beneath the false bottom of your office safe. Knuckles went pale, his tough exterior crumbling as he stared at her, stunned that she could know such details. April 2nd. Celeste continued, ignoring the growing tension. Sarah McKinnon, 16 years old, was last seen entering your private quarters upstairs. 3 days later, her body was discovered in Devil's Canyon, throat slit. The atmosphere in the saloon turned deadly. Several men near the doors instinctively edged away, subtly eager to escape the dangerous truths spilling into the open. Horse theft was one thing, but the murder of a teenage girl crossed even the unspoken codes of hardened criminals. McCain's fingers twitched toward his weapon, but Thaddeus anticipated it. Before McCain's hand could fully move, Thad's coat was out and aimed directly at him. His voice dropped to a cold whisper. "I wouldn't." But McCain's eyes weren't on him anymore. They focused on something behind Thaddeus, his lips curling into a sinister grin. "Actually, Royce, I believe you would. You're forgetting one thing." Thad barely had time to react before he felt the cold press of metal against the back of his neck. He'd been so locked onto the danger ahead that he'd overlooked the silent threat behind him. The bartender, the piano player, and others McCain had planted throughout the saloon. "Drop it," came a harsh whisper at his ear. Nice and slow. Thad's mind calculated frantically. Too many guns. Too many angles. Even if he turned and fired, Celeste would end up caught in the chaos, and McCain would walk away with everything. As he reluctantly began lowering his weapon, Celeste caught his eye. She mouthed one word: trust. Without warning, she flung the journal high into the air. Every head followed its flight as it spun under the oil lamps. In that split second, 3 things unfolded simultaneously. Celeste up behind a poker table. The man behind Thad shifted his focus to follow the airborne journal, and Thaddeus, running purely on instinct, spun sharply, driving his elbow into his captor's face. Blood sprayed as bone crunched. The room exploded into chaos. Gunfire shattered the silence, the sharp cracks echoing through the saloon as muzzle flashes lit the smoke-filled air like lightning bolts. In the confusion, bullets flew wildly and men scrambled for cover. Through it all, one thing remained clear. Vernon McCain was fleeing, clutching the journal as he ran for the back exit. Thad crashed through the saloon doors and into the cool desert night. His boots hammered the wooden boards as he chased McCain's fading silhouette beyond the general store. The sounds of gunfire still rang behind him, but none of it mattered now. Only McCain and the evidence in his hands mattered. Though McCain was fast, Thad's years of ranch work had kept him lean and steady. With each stride, he closed the distance, his spurs ringing with every determined step. "McCain!" Thad's voice cut through the night like a thunderclap. McCain spun, his face twisted with fury and desperation. The journal was clenched tightly in one hand. A revolver gleamed in the other. "You should have stayed out of this, Royce," he panted, raising the weapon. "Now you'll die with her." Before he could squeeze the trigger, another voice pierced the darkness. "Vernon McCain, you're under arrest for murder, horse theft, and conspiracy." Both men turned to see a tall figure emerge from the shadows near the sheriff's office, a badge glinting in the moonlight. His voice was steady, unmistakably authoritative. McCain's face turned ghostly white. "Marshal Coleman." He breathed. Marshal James Coleman stepped forward, face carved from stone. "Been receiving some interesting telegrams," he said evenly. "It appears someone's been keeping very thorough records of your business." Thad's breath caught as it all fell into place. Celeste hadn't been bluffing. She had been working with federal lawmen the entire time. "The woman you tried to auction tonight," the marshal continued. resting his hand on his holster, has been operating undercover for this office for the last 6 months. That journal you're holding contains enough to see you hang several times over. McCain's laugh came out high and brittle. She's a fugitive. She killed a man in Tombstone. She killed a man who tried to force himself on her. Coleman corrected sharply. A man tied to your horse theft ring. And the governor has already signed her full pardon, based on the evidence she provided. Thad staggered inwardly as the truth hit him. Celeste Washington was no desperate woman on the run. She was a federal agent who had set the entire trap. Everything, the auction, the journal, the standoff, had been a carefully staged plan to bring McCain down. McCain's eyes darted wildly, calculating one last desperate escape. His voice was low, venomous. Maybe so, but she's still in that saloon with my men. If you want her alive by morning, you'll let me walk out of here right now. But before anyone could respond, more footsteps echoed behind them. Celeste appeared from the shadows, her dress torn and dusty, but her eyes blazing. Marching ahead of her were Knuckles and his partner, hands raised in surrender. Behind them, the rest of McCain's gang followed, defeated and shackled. McCain's shoulders sank under the crushing weight of final defeat. The journal slipped from his grasp, falling to the dirt with a soft thud that sounded like a coffin lid closing. "It's over, McCain," Coleman said quietly, drawing his cuffs. "There's nowhere left to run." But Thad barely heard the marshal's words. His eyes remained fixed on Celeste as she walked toward him, strong, unbroken, and more beautiful than ever under the starlit sky. "Agent Washington," Coleman said respectfully, "exceptional work. The governor will be most pleased." Celeste smiled, but her gaze remained locked on Thad. "Thank you, Marshal. But none of it would have been possible without Mr. Royce. His courage gave me the opening I needed." Thad's head spun. "You knew from the moment I stood up in that saloon. You knew exactly how this would unfold." "Not exactly," Celeste said softly, stepping closer. "I knew McCain would try to extort you. I knew he'd eventually tip his hand. What I didn't know was whether anyone would be brave enough to offer everything they had for a stranger." Her fingers touched his arm gently, sending warmth through him. The deed to his ranch was still tucked inside his vest, a lifetime of work, offered up without hesitation for someone he'd only just met. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. "Because I needed to know who you truly were," she answered. "And now I do." Marshal Coleman cleared his throat, offering a polite pause. "Agent Washington, your assignment here is complete. You may return to Denver for reassignment. Or," his glance shifted meaningfully toward Thad, "you may take some well-deserved personal leave." As McCain and his men were loaded into the marshal's wagon, Thad barely noticed. His focus was fully on the woman before him, still trying to make sense of everything that had unfolded in a single night. "What happens now?" he asked softly. Celeste looked up at the endless Arizona sky, scattered with stars. She was quiet for a long moment before replying. "That depends. Tonight, you offer me freedom. The question is, would you consider a partnership?" "What kind of partnership?" Thad asked. Her smile was radiant, like the first sunrise after a long, dark night. The kind where a former federal agent helps a rancher build something new. Something neither of us could have done alone. A life free from the past, built on something good. Thad thought of the empty ranch waiting for him, of the lonely years spent convincing himself that hope was too dangerous. Then he thought of Celeste, her courage, her strength, her heart. "The circle I could use someone who knows how to read and write," he finally said, smiling, "and someone who's not afraid of a fight. And I could use a place to call home," she replied, her voice soft. "Somewhere far from town, where two people can start over, without anyone asking too many questions." As the marshal's wagon disappeared into the distance and the last embers of the saloon fires faded, Thad and Celeste stood together beneath the stars, two souls forever changed by one extraordinary night. Tomorrow would bring new struggles, but tonight, under the endless Arizona sky, they found something far rarer than gold or land, something truly worth fighting for.